Hello everyone and welcome to Weekly Liberty Rundown.
I'm Sean.
And I'm David.
And here's the news.
You sounded like Keemstar there for a second.
Oh, fuck. I'm not sure how I feel about that, actually. So, this week is pretty loaded, given the events. And if you're listening to this podcast, you probably already know what we're about to be diving into here. But we're going to open it right up with what happened in Austin, Texas on July 25th, which is about 5 days ago now. So, almost a week, with Garrett Foster. Geez, I don't even know where to start with this one.
Oh yeah, it's an extremely loaded topic. I know a lot of people who knew him personally. I have like 7 mutual friends with the guy on Facebook, or had, because they took his account down after people were trolling it. And
well, they were kind of trolling the living shit out of it. And there was a very interesting response to the situation. There was a very explosive, I would say, response to his death, how it happened, and what people were saying, and kind of the information that was sort of flying around about it. I know that I was pretty, aside from internal kind of chat circles that I was in when it came to public forums, I kind of tried to keep my mouth shut, mostly because I did want to wait and kind of see. Well, I wanted to wait for all the facts, right? Which I think is really funny, because the one thing I did notice was that there were a lot of conservatives who were kind of jumping on this bandwagon, and they tended to be I just find it really interesting, because the people who are generally the ones to be the first to say, let's wait for all the facts when it comes to police killing people, were the very first to sort of spread rumors about this situation.
And I think that's an interesting point, too, because conservatives and liberals, I see them as two sides of the same coin. It might sound cliche, but conservatives are seen by many members of the liberty community as statists, but not as bad as the left-leaning statists.
Absolutely.
That's just because many of us, myself included, used to be conservative, and then we transitioned over to libertarianism, anarchy. So we're going to tend to listen to conservatives more, either subconsciously or consciously. Yeah,
and that's a really good point. That's been kind of a long-standing relationship too, mostly just because of the fact that when it comes to, if we're looking at this very shallow thing, but the political quad compass. When it comes to the quadrants, we tend to agree with them a lot more on economics and things. Although I would say that their stance on economics is just for show, given the legislation that they tend to pass and support. But
it's a classic quote. Republicans have the rhetoric of libertarians and the governance of Democrats.
Yeah. That's pretty much how it goes down, because both parties are still very much authoritarian, so that's kind of something we have to deal with. Ronald Reagan's a really good example of that very little adage you just said, but that's aside. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. The thing with the conservative libertarians too is most libertarians, or at least the most vocal of libertarians, are more or less middle right, or in the bottom right quadrant, but closer to the middle in terms of the authoritarian libertarian axis.
Absolutely.
And so, since they have the most say, they're probably going to have the most issues with the protests and BLM in general. So if they see someone in a BLM protest getting killed, they're going to automatically assume he did something wrong, just as like a guilt by association.
Yeah, which I find is really interesting, because when it came to this, and the minute this story kind of broke, one of the very first things I saw, which is one of the first things I see a lot of the time when it comes to libertarians and boog boys and all that stuff, going to or associating with people who are going to these marches, not the organization of BLM, just the movement, is that they're immediately accused of this sort of Antifa bullshit, right? That they're sympathizing with Antifa. They're part of Antifa. They're Marxist sympathizers and all this other weird stuff, which I find really hilarious and also kind of irritating, mostly because of the fact that as libertarians, we're supposed to be these people who champion liberty and also champion individualism. But that tends to be a very collectivist sort of narrative.
Exactly.
Right?
And a lot of people, when they transition to libertarianism, they aren't transcending the idea of tribalism. They're just joining another tribe that happens to just purport to be as woke or more woke than anyone else who isn't part of the two-party system.
Yeah, and so I think, and that's a really interesting point that you make there. And I know the Libertarian, I would say the party, especially this year, given that it is an election year, does have probably has a lot of new members who are feeling disenfranchised by their previous party, be it Democrat or Republican, and so they haven't really, and given kind of the tense climate this year, they really haven't had a chance or time to be able to do the work to transcend that. So that might have a lot to do with it, but also at the same time, there are, you and I have both been libertarians for and anarchists for a long period of time in our own lives, and this is the type of stuff that I have been seeing going all along in the movement, in the movement, whatever you really want to call it, in my 12 years as a libertarian and an anarchist.
Yeah, like I've been a libertarian since around 2014, I would say, and I transitioned to anarchy in around 2017. That's actually, I had 2 years of being a libertarian who voted Republicans because I thought they were more libertarian.
Right.
So I was 18, I was voting age when Trump came into power, and so I said, the classic meme of most libertarian president. I unironically believed in that at the time, so I voted for Trump, and that it took like a year after that to realize that these two parties, it might sound cliche, like I said before, but these two parties are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, or as a lot of people say, two wings of the same bird. Yeah, and I was there too when I've been a libertarian since 2008. And when I was in 2008, I was a party libertarian, right? And this year I actually am again, just because of the fact that things are so weird. I actually considered voting, which is something I stopped in 2012 after Ron Paul got kind of screwed over at the Republican National Convention for the primaries.
Yeah, I stopped voting after I learned my lesson in 2016.
Yeah,
that was probably a much bigger lesson than 2012.
Yeah. No, in 2012, I actually changed my registration to Republican, and I voted for Ron Paul in the Republican primaries, and I watched him get screwed over, and that's I didn't even vote in the general election after those primaries because I watched that happen, and I said, why do I care?
I might vote, but I think we're getting ahead of ourselves here.
Yeah. So
how about the Garrett Foster situation in and of itself? I've heard a lot of people say, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, and a lot of boomer quotes like that, but I don't necessarily think that's true. First of all, he was in an open carry state, Texas, and even though he was not at a Second Amendment rally, he still had the right to open carry. Second point is, that car could have easily avoided the crowd.
Yeah.
And you can make the argument that blocking the road is a violation of the NAP or something along those lines, but if you see a crowd, your fight or flight response should kick in when you're driving around, and I feel like that driver might have been. I'm not saying anything definitively here because I'm not the driver. I've never met the driver. I don't even know who the driver is.
This is all speculation.
Yeah, this is complete speculation. But I feel like if you see a crowd in the distance, you're not going to drive into it unless you're trying to do something that's not exactly kosher.
Right.
And so I imagine that he might have been trying to defuse a situation or something along those lines. We do have the facts that he never fired a gun. His gun was pointed downward. Yeah. And even though he did say, they're not going to stop us, they're too much of a pussy to do it.
Yeah.
That shouldn't really factor into the actual events because the actual events was a matter of like 5 seconds.
And a lot of people talk about that, and he got what he deserved or whatever. This kind of rhetoric is just really interesting to me, given that and a lot of the times it comes from libertarians, and part of that has to do with the fact that there have been riots going on around the country, and I think it's you have to kind of clarify that Austin is a very different situation than Portland.
Yeah, Austin is the more mellow liberal city, and Portland, I mean, its slogan is "Keep Portland Weird" for a reason.
Yeah, and I mean, kind of as someone who lives on the West Coast, it's very much that stereotypical, very hyper liberal West Coast vibe in Portland, right? Sort of almost the embodiment of the memes when it comes to people on the left.
They look like Bozo the Clown over there. Oh God,
it's very
please
true.
Don't dislike this video. It's a joke.
But when it comes to Austin was actually, Garrett and his fiance Whitney were there for 50 days. They had each been there for 50 days, and there's been a lot of why they were there and things like that, and I know there's a lot of talk on who he was, and people will say, oh, he was a Marxist, he was all that. Now that his Facebook account is gone, I had gone to his Facebook account personally, and I think 5 minutes of scrolling through that account, not even 5 minutes, would have told you that
I've seen
none of that stuff. Right, none of that stuff is true.
It's completely false, and it's basically the conservative wing of the Libertarian Party trying to create a narrative that's against anything that has to do with BLM.
Right. And it's just this tribalist sort of collectivist mindset that they're kind of pushing out there. But the thing is that Garrett was a libertarian.
And he was very outspoken about it.
Yeah, and Spike Cohen had said in a tweet that he was a member of the Libertarian Party, which I'm going to assume is true just because I looked at his profile, and I'm assuming, he probably was. And so I have to believe that, whether or not I know he was protesting against police brutality. And he also was open carrying to probably protect, whatever he was saying, protecting protesters, maybe. I'm not entirely sure. But I know that people who are libertarians who have been at these protests have been out there bridging gaps or attempting to, right? Because you and I both know as libertarians that we've been speaking out against things like police brutality for years now.
Speaking out against police brutality, racism too. Racism's a big one. Even in the libertarian groups I run, I've even told people, like, you can't say the black community is to blame for this stuff. I'm not trying to be like a hardcore soy sipping SJW commie, but but like, right. But that's the thing. When you see people quoting the 1352 stat unironically, that's when you got to say something.
Yeah, and I've
memed about it before. I've joked about it, but I've never actually, Yeah,
I think anyone who says despite unironically is definitely someone who needs to be confronted, and that has a lot to do with, especially on the right. There's this sort of gospel mentality when it comes to empiricism, but like you kind of can't imply empiricism to what is essentially social sciences, right? When you're talking about populations, demographics, and things like that, you're talking about a social science, and there's so many other factors than just the numbers when it comes to that stuff. So
you have to see what story the numbers tell,
right?
And the story around the numbers instead of just the numbers themselves.
Right. But that's we're kind of sidetracking there, so I want to kind of get back to what I was originally saying, which is the fact that I had, and this might be speculation, but I have to believe, knowing other libertarians who have been at these Black Lives Matter protests, I have to believe that he was out there doing footwork, right?
Yeah, we're the keyboard warriors, and he was the one actually going out there and doing stuff.
Yeah, we sit around. We kind of, and the libertarian community as a whole, kind of is a little bit notorious for this, mostly because we do make a lot of memes.
Yeah. I mean,
But
there's Liberty memes, for example.
yeah, right. And we, we tend to sit around and sort of just pontificate all day on our keyboards, and we talk a lot of shit about the things that are going on in the outside world, while everyone else is out there, and it, that can be proven by their tans a lot of the time, unless they're white, which real pasty. That a sunburn would prove that.
Yeah, they
but yeah, but he was out there doing actual footwork, which and I gotta, to give credit where credit is due, as a libertarian and as an anarchist, I gotta give props to that, right? Because what most of us don't. We sit here and we kind of stand on these moral and philosophical high grounds of, as a lot of the time as hardliners.
Yeah.
And I won't do that because because reasons, right? And and I know. Oh, go ahead.
I think that factors into the whole Garrett Foster thing, because when people say play stupid games, win stupid prizes, they've never been in a situation like that. And
no.
If you're in panic mode, you're not the same person you are in panic mode as you are in a calm environments.
Right.
When you're watching a movie or something.
And that's a really good point, because especially a lot of people on the conservative wing, and also like in the gun community, were kind of coming up. I kind of saw them talking about all these different scenarios. Oh, well, if someone came up and tried to pull me out of my car and was slashing my tires, yada yada yada, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, that can't be further from what actually happened.
Yeah, the aggressor was likely. I'm not going to say he was, but he was likely the guy in the car.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen
it's a big word. I've seen the videos a lot. Whoever was recording the videos didn't do a very good job of recording the videos, but
no.
I can't say I would have done the same. I would have done as well, because someone's getting shot in
wild
front of
situation. Yeah, and you're likely downrange of those bullets. But I have seen a few video analyses, and when the first 5 shots go off, someone had actually managed to freeze the video, and on the first shot, and you can see the muzzle flash from within the car.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I it is impressive, actually.
You'd have to go in frame by frame.
They did, actually. So, but I mean, with the libertarian community being as passionate as they were about this thing, the people who were trying to kind of prove that Garrett wasn't the aggressor were pretty dead set on it, and someone had actually managed to do that a bit of a frame by frame and prove that the first 5 shots had come from within the car.
And that's why I try to stay away from saying definitive things about these things. One, for my personal mental health, because I know talking to libertarians can very adversely affect your mental health.
Yes, and as a libertarian.
And 2, libertarians are kind of violent and aggressive in their rhetoric. I know that's usually due to being passionate about what they believe in. And obviously other wings of the political spectrum are very, very passionate as well, especially radical leftists. And
correct, Republicans
are a strange demographic, but we won't get into those.
No. Yeah, a lot of a lot of times, there's, especially if you run in libertarian circles, especially on the internet, there's a lot of jokes that go around, and if you're an innocent bystander or somebody who's new, they'll be a little shocking to you, especially when it comes to throwing communists from helicopters, which...
Yeah, most of us don't actually believe in throwing commies from helicopters. That's a very radical wing of the government. It's just a meme. And even tragedies like this one, they do get memed by people who were friends with him. And if Garrett had survived that, he would have memed it himself.
Yeah. Make no mistake. So there is an unfortunate number of people in the libertarian wing of, culture of the, in the Libertarian Party who do sort of buy into that Pinochet-esque throw commies from helicopters sort of idea, but
it's a very simplistic way of thinking. It's basically the caveman thought of Oh yeah, me no like bad ideology. Me kill members of bad ideology.
Yeah, which actually makes them no better than the tankies, like the auth left
Exactly.
tankies, and the auth right. Sort of.
Like the
I mean, if you
Mussolini
get
types.
yeah, the nationalists and even the ethno nationalists and things like that kind of hang out in that top right quadrant. I understand.
I wouldn't want to say the H word Hitler because Hitler was neither right wing nor left wing.
Yeah,
He was a very authoritarian centrist.
yeah.
But that's neither
That's
here nor there.
no, that's for another day. But but one thing that became very apparent and honestly, I have to say I was pretty depressed for a couple days, because one thing that became very apparent after Garrett's death was the libertarian divide, which is something that we're always aware of in the
Yeah.
community. And it's something that is known, and it just kind of flies it doesn't fly under the radar. I think it's just in the back of our minds at all times.
It's
But
also a very specifically libertarian thing that
yeah,
people talk about because if you're outside of the party, you're not going to understand. You're just gonna think, oh, they're all lolberts.
right. But it's very real because libertarianism is it's an umbrella, right?
Yeah.
And we can go back into a lot of stuff like the history of libertarianism. It actually libertarianism actually originated from with left wing ideologies. Individualism actually originally way back when libertarianism first kind of burst onto the scene was left,
And
right?
sadly,
And
it was invented by the French.
yeah, yeah, right. And you can go into the traditions of anarchy, which were from the left, and Proudhon and all this other stuff. But that's neither sort of here nor there. But there is a libertarian divide, and whatever side of the spectrum you're on when it comes to that x-axis, so to speak, on the political quadrant. We kind of have to deal with this idea that we can say, oh, you're not a real libertarian, you're not a real libertarian, but as long as someone isn't anti-authoritarian, we kind of have isn't authoritarian. We kind of have to deal with the fact that those are people that exist and they're out there, right?
It's especially hard to come to terms with the left libertarians because they do have a lot of very divisive rhetoric.
Right, they do.
Like billionaires shouldn't exist. And stuff like that. We will forcibly redistribute your property.
Yeah, which makes me kind of wonder is how how far from authoritarian are those people actually?
A lot of them, they range from a spectrum of the community will do it and that makes them libertarian instead of the government, or everyone will just magically get along and throw all their stuff into a pool in the middle of the road and
we'll all take yeah. Yeah, to each according to their need,
which works on a small scale, but not
right.
And plus, if you want to be a commie in a voluntarist society, you get to be a commie.
Yeah, that's neither here nor there. But we have we sort of have all these different kind of factions in the libertarian world, right? You have like minarchists. You have anarchists, you have anarcho-capitalists, which is kind of honestly the newest wing. It's hard. A lot of us have a hard time admitting this, but we are one of the newer wings of anarchy.
The anarcho-capitalists are newer. I personally don't call myself an anarcho-capitalist. I call myself an agorist.
Yeah,
because I think of it as more of a matured and nuanced kind of ANCAP. I know that sounds a little non-inclusive, to use the leftist phrase, but but I think a lot of ANCAPs, or at least self-proclaimed ANCAPs, they have very authoritarian streaks to them.
Yeah, which is why we do have a sort of an auth right sort of wing in the libertarian world.
Yeah, and someone can be on the very bottom right and still be considered like auth right, it's this weird dynamic.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of that goes back to the, people who haven't done the work, people who haven't really taken the time to kind of undo a lot of that tribalism and that collectivism that, is sort of, so, I mean, we kind of grew up in this environment, right? We're taught these things from a very young age because, for whatever reason, right? Because they're basic truths that we're taught to believe that they're basic truths and whatever the case. But, the divide became very real after Garrett's death, and you had a lot of libertarian infighting.
Yeah, and I think infighting is fine, but it's also very counterproductive. Infighting is good for keeping everyone accountable, and it's bad for getting anything done.
Absolutely. And while it is a joke that, especially from people on the outside, I think it is. There are positives to it. There are positives to just not being this monolith, right?
Exactly, and that's why you have revolutions like the Communist Revolution and all them when they tried to become a monolith, but there was way too much intellectual diversity and millions of people died because one guy got into power,
right,
and purged everyone.
And he saw his view of what communism should be and had the power to make that, to try to get to that. I mean, he didn't make it real.
Yeah, and that's why I'm actually personally against violence in any way to overthrow the government or boog, if you will.
Right.
Not against self-defense or anything like that. That's just silly. I'm not one of those, anpaz.
You're not a pacifist, like sort of a Tom Woods type, or is that Bob Murphy? It's one of those older ANCAPs. But that's as someone who kind of runs in sort of around in multiple circles when it comes to the anarchist world. For the longest time I did identify as an ANCAP, and kind of as time goes on and kind of seeing what anarcho-capitalists are becoming, and I hate to say that's a little bit tribalist, but I lean more toward just identifying myself as an anarchist.
I identify myself as a general anarchist too, because when it comes down to it, you're trying to end a monopoly of violence.
Absolutely.
As opposed to perpetuate it or minimize it.
Right. And so when we talk about the boog, because I do run around in some of those circles, not as tightly because I'm not super armed or anything like that.
I don't even own a single gun.
Yeah. but when we talk about that, I enjoy it. It's something I like, but here's the thing. Violent revolution is supposed to be the last resort, right? It's supposed to be, we're out of options.
Yeah.
The boot is coming down in the most literal sense.
Like they're dragging us to FEMA camps.
Yeah, they are coming to our homes. They are knocking down our doors. They are dragging us to camps. And it is time to, we have run out of options. Peaceful revolution is no longer on the table, right?
Exactly.
And at this point, it still is. And I know a lot
much on the table. A lot of people like to say, "Oh, tyranny this and overreach that," but the thing is, you still have your basic freedom of speech, your basic freedom of protest, and if you have those basic freedoms, there's no need for violence. That sounds really statist and brainwashed, but I'm sure people on the internet are very, very well rounded, and obviously they don't jump to conclusions, so at least in my experience.
But there's I have to agree with you there are other ways to sort of choke the state, right? So to speak. And sort of doing your best to not give it as much tax revenue as you can. You can
do a lot of things. You can defensively vote. You can vote to say no on something. Now, a lot of ANCAPs would say voting is violence. None of them would say defensive voting is violence, unless they recently came off like a brain damage trip or something. And
I find it funny when ANCAPs who constantly quote Spooner are very averse to voting, given that Spooner was very much for defensive voting.
Yeah, and I personally am fine if people vote for libertarian candidates, because if you think voting will help you put a chokehold on the government or put a chokehold on the system, then go for it. I'm going to try to be open-minded about this thing, because even though I personally wouldn't vote, I might vote for Jorgensen in the upcoming election. But even though I personally don't vote too much because of that, I won't shame someone for voting.
Right, and I'm very much sort of in the same place right now, where I didn't vote for a long time. I was not at all enticed to vote in 2016. I thought Gary Johnson was an idiot. Gary
Johnson is most definitely an idiot.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have voted for him, no matter what.
No, and Joe's got her issues, and there was the tweets, and that sort of absolutist rhetoric, that BLM rhetoric, that we must be anti-racist and all that stuff. And I have my issues with her saying that, just because it was just like, you really could have expanded on this. This is something that Bank of America could have tweeted, or
it's basically
Amazon.
Her saying a leftist dog whistle without realizing it. But I'd like to give her the benefit of the doubt there, because I don't think she meant we have to go out and protest. I think she meant if you see racism on like an online message board or something, you call it out. And even though I personally think that you don't have to call out something if you see it, I do personally try to call things out if I see them.
Right.
Like I don't like to place burdens on people if they're not comfortable with them.
Right, and because it's just not fair, right? And it's also, there's some tribalism and some other nuances to that, which I totally understand. And I get that. And I get where you're coming from, too, because here's the facts. Here's the facts, right?
Facts and logic.
As libertarians, I thought about trying to do Ben Shapiro's voice, but I'm just going to leave that off the table. As libertarians, we sort of kind of have to take responsibility for the fact that there is this media narrative against us about racism.
Yes.
And a lot of you are going to hate me saying that, but here what's real is real, and we have sort of just kind of allowed a lot of racist types to occupy our space, and speak out, and there's arguments to be made that they're protected by the First Amendment and all that other stuff, but there's really questionable ethics when it comes to people hiding behind the First Amendment to justify them being human garbage. Okay, because racism is collectivism, number one. Yeah, it's protected by the First Amendment, but number one, if you're a libertarian, that's collectivist. Racism is collectivism, it's tribalism, exactly. and it's not something that we should like. Okay?
And plus, even if you're pro-collectivism, racism is still like not even necessary, because you're just classifying people based on their culture or
color.
How they were raised. You're basing people based on their environment and external factors rather than the people themselves.
Right. Content of their character or something,
Yeah. I don't like to say racism is just about color, because a lot of racists talk about culture and behaviors and all that, but those are products of the environment, not because of who they innately are as people.
Right. and all, we can talk about how people were raised and all this other stuff, and that goes for the racists too, because they, to sound sort of on the left here, that is a behavior that is taught.
Stunning and brave. And plus, I think libertarians, the thing with libertarians is we're very anti-SJW. I'm very anti-SJW.
Absolutely.
Libertarians don't want to seem like they're coming off as SJWs,
no.
because people have a lot of trouble distinguishing between being an SJW and being a normal, reasonable person who is against discrimination, racism, and collectivism. You don't have to be an SJW to be against that kind of thing.
No, and that's the thing, and it's like you can be against SJWs, and I'm totally for that, because they have their own forms of collectivism that they kind of have to shove down all of our throats, and I get that, and fight back against it. That's totally fine. But when it comes to our responses to that stuff, you don't have to respond to the SJWs by protecting racists by citing the First Amendment.
Exactly.
That's not something that you have to do. Yeah, racists have those rights, but you don't have to protect them, and you don't have to not call them out. Now, if you're not comfortable with calling out racists, I totally get that. You don't have to do it. I would encourage you to maybe possibly find some comfort or get yourself comfortable, or make yourself stunning and brave enough to do it, I guess. But you don't, that's not something that that's not a directive or an order from me. It's just something I would encourage, because of the fact that, we, especially this year, I have seen the racists within libertarian ranks get a lot louder, and I don't like it.
Yeah, like especially the ones who use what they think are very sly dog whistles.
For example,
I don't want to name names here, but let's call it Liberty Scoundrel Community Group. The guy who runs that, we'll call him John Johnson. Okay. The guy who runs that, you've seen a lot of the memes he posts, and a lot of them are basically like very anti-black, but also they wouldn't seem anti-black to someone who took them at face value.
Right.
Like crime statistics, IQ distributions, and things like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, the IQ distributions one. That's a fun cliff Molyneux went off of a long time ago.
Molyneux is still off that cliff. Molyneux is absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
I think he still calls himself an anarchist too.
He does. And which really, oh god, that fucking sucks, because he was my anarchist gateway. I discovered him in 2008, and back before he went like off the deep end with like a lot of that rhetoric and Trump and things like that.
That was recent too.
Yeah, and I found his video, "The Story of Your Enslavement," which I don't know if is on YouTube anymore, but I did find "The Story of Your Enslavement," and that kind of led me down this road when I was a minarchist, and Molyneux was spouting off a lot of, doing a lot of anarchist talk, and I was fighting it, but it was like a train wreck, and I was the most literal representation of what is the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist, and it was about 6 months for me.
Yeah. Mine was about like 3 or 4 years.
Really?
Yeah, it was a long time, because my thing was I still had that evangelical Christian conservative mindset, and I think that factored into it a lot. When I would hear stories about history and all that, it was told with that narrative in mind, and it took a few years to deprogram that. And I think there's a lot of good people in that section of the population. They're not all Bible thumping racist homophobes or whatever. There's a lot of good people in there, and I think lumping them all together is unfair. But at the same time, there are prejudices in those communities. Absolutely.
And a lot of those prejudices are very, very much show, especially in the sort of evangelical wing of the Republican community.
It was weird too, because since I'm like not completely white, I'm like mixed or whatever. It was weird like being around pretty much everyone who was white, because even though I look white, I still don't have a completely white background, and a lot of stuff that white people do is actually quite alien to me. Like, why the fuck do you people wear shoes in the house?
Yeah, yeah, I know. I'm still very much one of the people who takes my shoes off the minute I get in the door.
Yeah.
But I am Asian, so there's that.
Yeah. And my mom is Asian. My grandfather's Asian.
Yeah, I'm jungle Asian though.
Same. I'm quarter Indonesian.
Yeah. Oh, really? Yeah, I'm like 5% Indonesian, but I'm obviously mostly Filipino.
Yeah.
But
the Spanish name gave it away.
yeah. I don't know what else I am. Every Filipino who's in America is a mutt. I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
A lot of Filipinos like to say they're pure Filipino. No. We got colonized by way too many people.
What even is pure Filipino anymore?
If I were to claim that I'm full Filipino, it would be hilarious because I'd need to be at least, I don't know, 2 feet shorter and 12 shades darker before I could even consider that idea. But yeah, so, but back to what we were sort of talking about here is, wow, I did lose it.
I lost.
What were we talking about?
How about we talk about defensively running for office?
Yeah, that's totally fine.
That's a good one too.
There's certain arguments about whether Joe is defensively running for office, but I would, if I were defensively voting, I would vote for her. That's what we were talking about essentially. She had those tweets and stuff like that, but I would still think that overall she's not a terrible candidate.
No, and
plus, I would.
Plus, she's older, so she's not as in touch with.
Right, and she's not, and I love them to death, but I do have a little bit of a beef with the hardliners. When it comes to this subject, like your Eric July and Dave Smith and guys like that, I love them. I still follow them. I listen to Dave's podcast almost religiously.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Eric July. I think he's the most based one ever.
Absolutely, he's one of my favorite libertarians that there is, especially among our generation. But I gotta say, she's a lot. Joe has her points of weirdness and dorkiness, but she is light years ahead of Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
Exactly.
And I don't think I'm gonna say it, but I think any libertarian who finds themselves voting for Trump, you're not gonna be able to justify that. You're gonna have a very hard time justifying that.
I could see voting for him in 2016.
Absolutely,
but not in 2020.
Especially up against Hillary Clinton. But
wait a second, we can't say that. Hey, does anyone see a red dot on my wall or something like that?
Now, I will say that, like, when it comes to cultural things, Trump did bring about certain changes that I think were necessary. Not in the sense of, like, racists are now cool again. They're not. I don't think they ever have been.
They never were.
They never were, and they're never going to be. But he did kind of, throw the gloves off, so to speak, and and kind of fought back in this sort of cultural movement of like cancel culture and what you're allowed to say and things you're allowed to do, and
that's
thought policing.
That's why I found him so attractive, was because he seemed libertarian at the time. He was anti-establishment. He was anti-cancel culture, and we've seen a lot of stuff like that happen in like 2015. 2015 was a huge year for cancel culture because that was the start of the BLM movement. And that was when people were getting fired for saying stuff like all lives matter, which I honestly do not agree with.
Right.
I don't agree with all lives matter, and I don't agree with people firing each other over that shit.
Yeah. Well, because all lives matter is really a counter protest, and it was come up with in a response to Black Lives Matter. Yeah. And it's more, I think people who say all lives matter, because we have to talk about the nuance here, right? And people who say all lives matter are just people who just can't read the room.
Exactly. Right? There are people who don't get that they're talking about black lives, those specific black lives, in that case the people who were recently slain in 2015. Now honestly, I have an issue with the slogan Black Lives Matter as well, just because it's tied with these organizations that are, I'm not going to say Black Lives Matter is one organization because it's not, but there are overtly Marxist organizations that have taken over the term. And
Yes.
the argument could be made that we shouldn't let the Marxists take over that term because that just gives them more power. I'm not sure about that one. I'm just going to leave it at I don't know. I don't know all the answers.
Yeah, and and that's really a hard line that a lot of anarchists, especially on anarcho-capitalists, have been drawing, is that just kind of throwing it all in as they're all Marxists. They're all Marxists, and I know a lot. Especially as someone who lives in California, I have a lot of black friends. Okay, and
I have a few too.
Yeah, and I can't say I don't sympathize with their desire to not be scared fucking shitless around police officers.
Exactly. Like, I feel uncomfortable around police officers for my own personal reasons that I don't want to disclose on a public podcast, but also, I can imagine that being like an external thing. Like, if you're black, you can't change the fact that you're black.
No. You're born that way. That's why I think the Blue Lives Matter thing is just absolutely fucking hilarious, because that's a job.
It's really funny. They act like police are being discriminated against for something that wasn't their choice, but last time I checked, no one dragged you by the ear to police academy.
Yeah.
And was like, I'm going to shoot you in the face if you don't go into those classes right now and start writing tickets.
Yeah.
You better shoot those black guys, mister.
That's a uniform they can take off at the end of the day. Okay, they can walk around in plain clothes, and unless you know them, you're not gonna know.
I mean, a lot of times you can tell someone's a cop just by, but not all of them.
No, I mean, you spend enough time around someone, and they don't even ever have to say it, and you can figure it out. But yeah, so I have to empathize. I do empathize. I empathize with that. And we had here in California, there's tons of that happens. I mean, you have the LAPD, who's kind of just known for that kind of garbage. They're notorious for it.
The NYPD too, they're known for that as well.
Yeah, I feel like the LAPD and the NYPD kind of they go back and forth on who's the most absolute piece of shit police department in the country.
Yeah. Obviously, I say NYPD because New York beats LA in everything. Just the superior city overall. They have better food, better people, less traffic, better racism.
I'll give you the last one. I might even give you the traffic one. I don't know, but
I live like 45 minutes away from there, so
I'll fist fight you on the food thing though. But that we're getting ahead of ourselves. Yeah, so I again, like I said, I think Joe's a better option, and I think calling out racism, especially as a libertarian, is something that we should really consider more, because the fact of the matter is that they've made a home in our ranks.
They definitely have. Especially in groups like I'm gonna make a fake name here again. Freedom-minded gamers who play on the computer platform.
Yeah. Please do not rise up.
No rising up for you. Stay down.
I'm not. I don't really want to see that happening. But it's just.
And you would think that gamers would be more sympathetic because they are the most oppressed minority.
Yeah. Next to billionaires, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it's something that we as libertarians should consider. I'm not going to say you must. I'm not going to give you a directive. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I think it's something
very libertarian.
No, it wouldn't. But I'm going to encourage you to think about it. I'm going to encourage you to consider this idea, to call out these guys and some girls. I mean, as a libertarian, I think we all know that there aren't very many women in our circles, but to just call it out, to maybe do something about it, or to your racist friends who might not be as outspoken, but they are. Maybe educate them, talk to them about it. And I'm not talking about calling everything racist, because again,
that makes things swing in the complete opposite direction. You're going to make racism worse by doing that.
Yeah, some people just don't know better, right? That doesn't make them racist.
That being offended by literally everything gives racists more power.
Right, and also when it comes to like, you know, things that are racist, some people just don't know better. You know what I'm saying? Like, so that doesn't make them racist. They just might not know about certain things that are going on. Like some people just aren't aware about like police brutality against blacks and how that works, right?
Yeah,
and
they never lived in the inner city and they don't understand. You don't need to live in the inner city to understand it, but
right. But it's just something that, you know,
to their suburban environment.
Right, and it's something that they're just unable to sort of reconcile with, right? Because it's something they've never seen, it's something they've never witnessed, they don't know enough about. That doesn't make them racist. They're just kind of oblivious to it.
Exactly.
You know, so I'm gonna, you know, so be careful if you're gonna consider this thing and actually make a move on it, and don't go that way of looking like an SJW, because those are starting to sort of pour into the libertarian movement too, and I don't like you guys either.
Wait a second. It's not magically okay to be racist if you call yourself an anarchist or a libertarian now?
No, it's just not.
Better delete some tweets.
Yeah. But you know, SJWs are sort of starting to make little niches in the libertarian community too, and I don't like you guys either. So
no, we don't like you. Like the ones who are like, oh no, I wrongfully addressed a group of women as guys. Oh no, burn me at the stake.
Help. Yeah. Yins, y'all, whatever you want to use.
Oh god, if you use the word y'all and you are not from the South, please just don't. Please.
Yeah.
I can smell the soy from here.
I used to use it ironically.
I've been sipping on this soy latte right here. That's why I've been saying stuff against racism the whole time.
But yeah, so that right there, and that was a bit of a tangent we went on. But you know, the libertarian divide is something that's very important, and it's something that that needs to be understood. Because having the divide, the differences, so to speak, is really good. Libertarians, you know, we need to hold ourselves accountable. Infighting's fine. You know, being able to have our differences and still discuss them is great. But when big things like this happen is when those differences need to sort of be set aside, right? Because when we talk about things like the revolution, you know, and the bugs in our community love to talk about this. You know, bugs. 1776, because the original joke was 1776 Part 2 Electric Boogaloo, right? Yeah. And everyone likes to talk about that. But here's the thing. If we're going to talk about violent revolution, if that ever were to happen, which I hope to God it does not, but, you know, sometimes you can't control events. A lot of the founders did not fucking like each other. And we like to paint this pretty picture where they were all just bros hanging out and just chilling. Yeah, right. And they were just chilling and just vibing as they were writing the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration. They didn't like each other, and a lot of them were very brutal to each other. And this becomes very true in the things that happened after the revolution, like, you know, Hamilton and the duels and things like that. But they were able to unite under one common goal, because total unity. A lot of these people, especially, and this comes a lot from the right, people on the right, they're like, "Oh, we just need to unite." Like, no, total unity is a pipe dream. It's never going to happen. People are way too different. People are individuals, and that's fine, and they should be able to do that.
Even the unity of the Founding Fathers culminated in the Civil War.
Yeah, it did. The unity of the Founding Fathers culminated in the Civil War. But the thing is that they were, when it came to what they were addressing at the time, they were able to unite under one thing. They all fucking hated the crown.
Exactly. I think with that we can actually wrap up. It is 54 minutes.
Oh. Yeah, we gotta go.
We're originally going to make this a half hour, but it looks like this podcast is going to be an hour long. If you guys
we knew this was going to be a loaded episode.
Yeah. If you guys watched this long, I thank you guys for watching. This was the very first episode of Weekly Liberty Rundown, if you don't count our dry run in the beginning. We'll release that as a
Right.
Patreon reward one day. Nah, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
And
Maybe.
everyone make sure to join our Patreon only Discord.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding about that too. The Discord's free.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, if you
So
want to
please
join the
come along.
Discord, click the link in the description. Remember to annihilate that like button and ravage that subscribe button and ring the bell.
And yeah. Make sure to absolutely just make that bell look like the Liberty Bell.
Yeah, make that bell your bitch.
Thanks, you guys, for listening, and we will see you again next week.
All right, peace.